Calvin Watkins, Dallas Morning News. Guyton's got quite a few penalties. Is that more about him being a rookie, or is it something else going on?
This is a
No,
really
I
good
think
question about Guyton.
he's doing some really good things, Calvin. He really is. Again, he's playing left tackle in the NFL. He's young. What we're really focusing on with him this week, and we've talked about it, and not just to him, all the young players. There's a fundamental emphasis that has to happen. I mean, he is so talented and he is so athletic, but he does get off balance at times. He oversets at times. And so for him, a young player that missed a lot of training camp, it's really that intentionality. We talked to the guys today about, when you go out to practice, you can't just go out there and without having a focus or an intentionality of, hey, I want to improve this. So like for Tyler, it's his feet and his hand usage. And again, not just Tyler, but the penalties that we've had, most of them I would say are penalties. If the hand gets outside and you're grabbing a guy's jersey, I mean, they're going to call that. And so, I don't think that looking back at them, most of them I thought were legitimate calls, but how do you clean those up? It's got nothing to do with talent. It's got to do with his fundamentals and the intentionality of practice. I think he's got to understand that, shoot, you get a chance to go against good players in practice one-on-one and maximize those.
Okay, so he said a few good things about Tyler Guyton right there. So he was asked about Tyler Guyton's penalty and kind of gave an evaluation of Tyler Guyton as a player. So number one, I forgot that Tyler Guyton missed part of training camp with an injury. So I'm really glad that he mentioned that. Once again, not an excuse, just context. But I'm also glad that he acknowledged that Tyler Guyton has been doing some good things, because he honestly has. And I think it's one of those situations where the good that he does doesn't get acknowledged as much, because when he and this can go for damn near any O-lineman. If you're doing your job and you're not doing anything crazy, like really putting dudes in the ground, if you're just simply doing your job, it's not going to be noticed as much unless people are specifically watching the O-line. But just like the general observer, the typical fan won't notice, because that's what they expect. They expect there to be a pocket. They expect the play to go off. And so it's one of those things like, okay, you're doing your job, nobody notices. But when you're not doing your job and the quarterback gets pressured or the quarterback gets sacked or hit, people notice a lot more. Or if you commit a penalty and you cause a play to be canceled out, people are going to notice that. They're going to notice when the team is negatively impacted. They're going to notice when something doesn't go the way that they expect it to go. And so for Tyler Guyton, I do think that's a big part of the reason why a lot of the bad that he does stands out way more than a lot of the good that he does. And something else that I was thinking about today is the fact that coming into this season, and, just from when he was asked questions after he was drafted, he talked about the fact that he played right tackle in college, but he kind of made it sound like what he did in college would be transferable, because when he was in college, the right side was the quarterback's blind side. And I'm sure there is some truth to that. But there's also something to be said for changing the whole different direction and still having to do your job. So while you may be used to what someone might try to do from the quarterback's blind side, you still have to get used to the movement and the biomechanics of what you're doing now. And then there's also the fact that, and I say this all the time about college players, the defenses that you'll see in the NFL are so far above and beyond any defense that you'll face in college. So even if he did play left tackle in college and he did do a bang up job of it, there would still be somewhat of a learning curve. But overall, and he's going to talk about Tyler Guyton again later, but overall, I just want to emphasize that, yes, Tyler Guyton does need work. I'm not denying that. And I know people are frustrated by the penalties. And Shotty said that, I don't remember his exact words, but he said something insinuating that he doesn't necessarily agree with all the calls. But I think one of the reasons why the calls is happening has to do with something that he's going to mention later. But Tyler Guyton is doing a lot of good. It just so happens that he also needs a lot of work. Two things can be true. So this was interesting. And I'm not sure if he did this on purpose or if this was like him misinterpreting the question, but the question was, your offense is mostly young. Talk about Zach Martin's professionalism, even though essentially he's the oldest guy on this young offensive line. So he starts talking about Zach Martin, compliments him, and then he starts talking about Terrence Steele, another veteran on the line, compliments him. But then he goes into Guyton. And even though Guyton wasn't necessarily who this person was asking about, he does mention some interesting things about Guyton that I feel are significant. So it almost sounds like he's trying to defend Tyler Guyton. And so I want y'all to listen to this, and y'all let me know how y'all feel about this defense of Tyler Guyton in the comments as you're listening to it. And I'm going to let you know what I think as soon as he's done.
And she's one of the best to ever do it. I mean, and then, Guyton's going to be fine. I mean, when I was with the Jets, we drafted DeBrickshaw Ferguson, I think 4th overall. And for the first year, I mean, it was just growing pains and people saying this guy's a bust and he can't play and this and that. And no one's saying that about Tyler, but like, it's a hard position to play.
He said no one's saying that about Tyler. No one's called him a bust, but I have seen, unfortunately, people say that other thing, but we're going to keep going.
And you're going to get their best every time. And sometimes they actually fight to get over there and rush against you. And the cool thing with Tyler is, he's not going to blink. I mean, he knows he's talented. He knows there's things he can clean up. We actually, we make a bunch of self-scout tapes that our guys try to find time to watch, where you literally can go and watch your set. So you're watching, imagine if you're Tyler Guyton, you're watching all of your sets. So you're seeing the same thing that the defensive guys are seeing. And it's amazing when you ask these guys to give you a report, they see it. They don't always see it during the course of a game. And that's why we're on the sidelines making adjustments. But they get a chance when they study those to see some of the things that they're doing. And, oh, shoot, I see why these guys are attacking me this way.
So that bit about the self-scout tapes, that was the part that I felt like connected to what we were saying earlier about the Steelers and also about the penalties. And here's why. So he essentially said they have these self-scout tapes where they can look at them and see what the opposing defense is seeing and why they're attacking them a certain way. So that I was thinking about that when we were talking about what might happen with the Steelers, mainly because what he just described is what I was afraid, or I should say what I am afraid might happen with the Steelers, with it being that what Tyler Guyton is working on, it's like the same thing every game. It's not like he has one game where this one thing is an issue and then all of a sudden something else is an issue. You can see that he's still working on the same things. And in his defense, I will say this, from watching him and from being a person who has had to work with several different types of athletes on several things, what he's trying to fix is not the simplest thing to fix. It's something that he can improve over the course of the season. But the fact that he hasn't fixed it, from one week to another, honestly doesn't surprise me. And it doesn't concern me for him. I believe he'll get it done, but how it will ultimately impact the offense is what is a concern. And I think that's what a lot of people's concern is. And a lot of that has to do with what he just said and with what he said earlier about the penalties, because what he just said is they look at the self-scout tapes and then they're able to, hold on, let me full screen myself since I'm talking for a while. So what he just said is they look at the self-scout tapes and then they're able to see what the defense is seeing. And so they can understand better why a person is attacking them the way that they are. And that is something that if you watch Tyler Guyton and you understand the biomechanics of how he's losing balances in ends up tabletop. I forgot the terminology that Shotty just used, but if you actually watch the film, you know what I'm talking about. And so if I'm a defender and I have to go up against him, yeah, just from looking at that, there are certain things that I will do that I know will get him off balance. There are certain things that I will do that I know will beat him because I've seen what works. I've seen how he tends to react to certain motions. And I'm like, oh, I can use this, right? But the same way I can use it to beat him or to get him off balance, I might also be able to use it to bait him into penalties. And I think that's why Schottenheimer said what he said about not agreeing with certain calls, because he probably looks at some of those situations and sees that Guyton is being baited into penalties. Now, whether you still think those are valid penalties or not, that I know we don't want to think of it as an opinionated situation, but it is kind of an opinionated situation because, yes, things are written a certain way in the rule book, but it's like they're written that way so that offensive linemen don't just completely manhandle and abuse the defenders. But when you see a situation where an offensive lineman is clearly being baited, it does, I think if you're looking at it that way, it does kind of beg the question like, okay, should he have been called on that? Or like, so was he actually holding that guy? Or did that guy put himself in a position to make himself look like he was being held? Things like that. But regardless, I do think the self-scouting that Shotty just mentioned will help. It's essential, as a matter of fact. Just going back to my experience working with athletes, there are so many people who might be otherwise really good at a sport, but they really don't realize that what they think they're doing is not what they're actually doing. And sometimes they don't see it until you show them. And sometimes you do have to show them from multiple angles. And sometimes you literally do have to break down like, hey, when you do this, somebody who's facing you, they're going to respond this way. And that's why it's urgent that you fix it, not just for you, but to take away a weapon that they have. But let's keep going. I want to listen to more of what Shotty has to say.
Joe Hoyt, All City Dallas. 2 of the 3 holdings Tyler Guyton had came on Kayvon Thibodeau.
Asking about
moves.
Tyler
I
again.
know NFL rules allow like a certain level of holding. It's kind of a gray area with rib moves. How fine of a line is that?
So that laugh to me suggests that Shotty feels like some of those holds were a gray area. And I don't know if the video made it out, but there were reports of Tyler Guyton after the game saying something about the refs that he felt away. And I don't know what the actual quote was, but whatever Shotty's laughing about, it's probably why. Only Tyler was upset about it, and Shotty has found enough space between the game and now to laugh about it.
For an offensive lineman to accurately do that when someone throws a rip move?
Yeah, again, I think what I would say is, we never want to put in the official's hands. There is a technique of how you,
That's fair.
if you set out, you kind of get beat inside, how you replace your feet. And that's a big part of it. And the great thing with Tyler is he's got the length to do it. And so a lot of it is using your length, those, 35, 34, 36 arms that he's got to kind of, wash the guy down. Where he's missed some with his hands. And so it's more of just training the hands and the consistency of the hands and using the hands and things like that. But again, if you get your hands on the inside and the guy kind of starts to tug or pull, since they've moved the official back, the umpire, but you got eyes everywhere in the backfield. And so those guys have to play cleaner with better hands.
Yeah. How much of an emphasis then, if it's the same thing happened twice, how much of an emphasis?
Yeah. Big time, because we know what they're studying that and they're saying, okay, hey, does this guy struggle versus the inside move? We have to correct that, because if you don't, guess what? It's going to show up the next week. The cool thing about this league is there's so much video. Everything is cut up. And now with PFF, you can pull up all these different things. And so that's why I think, again, I'm going to mention the self-scout tapes again. These guys, they have to look at those things. They have to see what their opponents are studying. It's not enough to just study Thibodeau. What is Thibodeau looking at against you? This week, Terrence Steele. What's, Watt looking at with you? It's the corners are no different. It's not just the skill guys that have to watch tape of themselves and the opponent. It's really everybody.
So what he's saying, he's not wrong. So he brought up the self-scouts again because that particular journalist, and I didn't catch the name at the beginning, but that particular journalist mentioned, like, he was talking about the penalties, and Shotty gave him reasoning for that. And he's like, yeah, but it was the same thing multiple times. And Shotty's basically saying, like, yes, that's because they're studying him. And so what I'm really hoping is that with this mini bye and with him having, and by him I mean Tyler Guyton, with him having more time to do some of the self-scouting that Shotty is talking about, that he can actually eliminate some of the issues and some of the tendencies that opposing defenses are using against him. I'm gonna give you an example from when I coached roller derby. It's like we would watch film and I would show my skaters, okay, this is what's happening, and I would show them each time it happened. Like every time they do this, you're doing that, and now they expect it. Because like the thing with roller derby is like we would go to tournaments, and sometimes you'd play 4 or 5 games in a weekend. So it wasn't even just, oh, let me watch tape on you and hope you do the same thing next week. It's like the person that you are going to play in the next round, they literally be sitting there watching you, watching everything you did, taking notes, so that when they played you later that day or the next day, they're like, oh, I know this person does XYZ. I just saw them do it, right? So what he's essentially saying is that Tyler needs to understand those things about himself so that he can fix it. And sometimes that's even something that you can work on by yourself. Because I would literally take these skaters and I would show them what the issue was. And I would show them, okay, you have a tendency to move this way. Instead, you need to practice moving this way. And sometimes, I'm not saying this will definitely fix it with Tyler. I'm just giving y'all an example. But sometimes just them having that mental image in their mind and being able to practice a different movement and a different pattern of movement was able to help them out a little bit, not 100%, but enough to make a dent in the issues that they were having. So if you think about it, if a player is getting 2 to 4 penalties in a game because of something, and you cut that in half, and you think about the yards that an offense loses because of penalties, not just because of the yards that are penalized, the 10, 15 yards, but it's like if there's an 8-yard run that's called back because of holding, and then you have penalty yardage on top of that, that's even more yardage that you're losing, right? So yes, even being able to mitigate something like that by 50% could be significant enough to make a difference in a whole drive, you know? So I really like what Shadi is saying here about the self-scouting. I hope it's something that he's emphasizing and something that the guys are taking seriously, because it can really, really make a huge difference. Like the sooner you realize those tendencies that they're taking advantage of, the sooner you can fix it. And even if you don't fix it 100% the first week you work on it, every week it gets better, and every week that's an improvement for the offense. We're going to listen to this last minute of Shadi. Then I'll take him off the screen and we'll read some of y'all's final comments, and we'll get out of here because I am both tired and hungry.